My name is Crystal Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never expected my birthday surprise would be my daughter Audrey driving me to Golden Sunset Nursing Home. The confusion turned to horror when I heard her cold words, "You're becoming a burden, Mom. This is better for everyone." She walked away without looking back, leaving me standing there with a small suitcase. What my daughter never knew was that her supposedly senile mother had $300 million in assets she knew nothing about. If you're watching this from a place where family loyalty still matters, please subscribe and share where you're from in the comments. Trust me, you'll want to see how a supposedly crazy old woman turned the tables. My story begins long before that fateful birthday. For 40 years, I built a successful career in investment banking. I started as a junior analyst when women were barely allowed in the boardroom and climbed my way to executive vice president at Morgan Stanley. The journey wasn't easy, especially after my husband David died suddenly of a heart attack when our daughter Audrey was just 8 years old. I still remember that terrible night trying to explain to my little girl that Daddy wasn't coming home. She clung to me, her small body shaking with sobs, and I made a silent promise that I would give her everything she needed. That promise shaped the next 3 decades of my life. Being a single mother in the cutthroat world of finance meant sacrifices. I worked 80-hour weeks, took international calls at 3 in the morning, and missed more school plays than I care to admit. But everything I did was for Audrey. I wanted her to have opportunities I never had growing up in my working-class family in Ohio. And provide I did. Audrey attended Westridge, the most prestigious private school in our area. She had piano lessons, horse riding lessons, summer programs in Europe, and later a full ride through Yale where she studied art history. When she fell in love with Thomas during her senior year, I paid for the dream wedding she always wanted at the Plaza Hotel. $100,000 for a single day, but seeing her happiness made every penny worthwhile. Thomas came from a good family, but he never quite found his footing professionally. He called himself a luxury real estate agent, but the commissions were few and far between. Still, he had expensive tastes. The tailored suits, the imported sports car, the country club membership. I had concerns, but kept them to myself. Audrey was in love, and I wouldn't interfere with her choices. What neither of them knew was how substantial my wealth had become. Over decades in finance, I had made shrewd investments, particularly in early tech companies and foreign markets. By the time I was 60, my net worth had quietly grown to over $300 million. But I never flaunted it. I lived in the same 4-bedroom house I'd bought when Audrey was 10. I drove a practical sedan. I believed in living below my means and planned to use my fortune for good causes and to secure my family's future. I also wanted Audrey to develop her own work ethic, her own sense of accomplishment. Too many of my wealthy colleagues had children who became entitled and directionless. I was determined that wouldn't happen to my daughter. When I retired 3 years ago at 65, I looked forward to finally having time to travel, to pursue hobbies I'd neglected, but most importantly, time with family. Audrey had given birth to my grandson Jackson by then, and at 12 years old, he was the light of my life. A bright, compassionate boy who inherited my love for mathematics and his grandfather's kind eyes. Jackson and I formed a special bond. When he stayed with me on weekends, we would bake cookies together, build elaborate model rockets, and have long talks about the universe and his dreams of becoming an astronomer. "Grandma," he once told me, "you're the only grown-up who never treats me like I'm just a kid." But looking back, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. After my retirement, Audrey and Thomas visited less frequently. Their calls became shorter, often focused on their financial struggles. Thomas had made some temporary investments that hadn't panned out. Their credit card debt was mounting. The private school they'd chosen for Jackson was so expensive but necessary for his future. I offered help occasionally, small amounts that wouldn't enable dependence but would ease their stress. Sometimes they accepted, sometimes Audrey would bristle with a pride I had unknowingly instilled in her. "We're fine, Mom. We can handle our own finances." As my 68th birthday approached, I looked forward to a family celebration. Audrey mentioned taking me to my favorite restaurant, and I spent the week anticipating our time together. I even bought a new dress for the occasion, sapphire blue, to match the earrings David had given me on our last anniversary together. I never imagined how drastically my life was about to change, or that the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for was seeing me not as her mother, but as a solution to her financial problems. My birthday morning started with such optimism. I woke early and prepared a special breakfast, thinking perhaps Audrey, Thomas, and Jackson might come by before our dinner reservation. I made Belgian waffles with fresh berries, a tradition from Audrey's childhood birthdays. The house was filled with the sweet aroma of vanilla and maple syrup, but as the morning stretched on, no one arrived. At 11:30, the phone rang. It was Audrey, her voice oddly tight. "Change of plans, Mom. We'll pick you up at 2 instead of meeting at the restaurant. Is that okay?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, hiding my disappointment at the delayed celebration. "I'll be ready." I spent the next hours preparing myself, applying makeup carefully to hide the new wrinkles that seemed to appear daily now. I styled my silver hair into a neat bob and put on my new dress, checking my reflection with a critical eye. Not bad for 68, I thought, though the woman in the mirror looked more vulnerable than I felt. At 2:30, half an hour late, a car pulled into my driveway. Thomas was driving their new Range Rover, another luxury purchase they supposedly couldn't afford. Audrey sat in the passenger seat, and Jackson was in the back, his face pressed against the window, waving enthusiastically when he saw me. As I approached the car, I noticed Thomas and Audrey exchange a look I couldn't quite interpret. Tension, guilt. Whatever it was disappeared behind bright smiles when I opened the door. "Happy birthday, Grandma." Jackson leaned forward to hug me as I settled into the back seat beside him. "You look nice, Mom," Audrey said, but her eyes darted away quickly, focusing on her phone. I noticed a new diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, catching the afternoon sunlight. Just last month, she'd told me they were struggling to pay Jackson's tuition. "Thank you, dear. You look lovely, too." I turned to Jackson, whose usual exuberance seemed dampened. "How's school going, young man? Still enjoying your astronomy club?" While Jackson told me about the recent meteor shower his club had observed, I caught Thomas checking his watch repeatedly. Audrey kept glancing at him nervously. Something was off. "So where are we headed?" I asked after we'd been driving for 20 minutes in a direction that wasn't toward the restaurant. "We thought we'd show you something first," Audrey said, her voice artificially bright. "A surprise." "We bought a vacation property," Thomas announced proudly. "A cabin near Lake Tahoe. It's an investment, really. The market there is booming." "That sounds wonderful," I said carefully, noting how this contradicted their claims of financial hardship. "When did this happen?" "Last month," Audrey said quickly. "We got an amazing deal. Of course it stretched us thin, but sometimes you have to seize opportunities right." "Of course," I agreed. "If you need any help with the expenses, I'd be happy to." "No," Audrey responded too sharply, then softening her tone. "We've got it handled, Mom, but thanks." The car fell silent. Jackson's hand found mine squeezing gently. His eyes held a knowledge beyond his years, and I felt a chill run through me. We turned onto a tree-lined street I didn't recognize, approaching a large building set back from the road. The sign read Golden Sunset Nursing Home and Assisted Living Center. My heart dropped. "Why are we stopping here?" "We just thought you might want to look around," Audrey said, not meeting my eyes. "They have a wonderful community, lots of activities." As Thomas parked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the trunk visible when Thomas opened, it was a suitcase. My suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Grandma, I didn't know," Jackson whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "They didn't tell me until we were driving to pick you up." "Jackson, that's enough," Thomas said sharply. "Go wait by the fountain. I need to help Grandma with her things." "I'm not going anywhere," Jackson protested, his voice rising. "This is wrong, and you know it." Jackson, now Thomas's command, left no room for argument. He grabbed my grandson's arm, marching him toward a decorative fountain near the entrance. I stood frozen beside the car as Audrey pulled my suitcase from the trunk. The weight of understanding crashed down on me. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't a tour. This was a delivery. "Audrey," I said, fighting to keep my voice from breaking. "What have you done?" The nursing home lobby was all beige walls, and the distinct smell of industrial cleaner masked by artificial floral scents. A woman in a navy suit approached with a professionally sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Patricia Hendricks, the director. We've been expecting you." Expecting me? My mind reeled. This had been planned well in advance of today. "There must be some mistake," I began, but Audrey cut me off. "Mom, we've discussed this," she said loudly, as if I were hard of hearing. "Remember, You agreed this would be better for everyone. The lie hung in the air between us. We had never discussed anything of the sort. Director Hendricks guided us to her office, where a stack of papers waited on her desk. We just need to complete the admission paperwork. I see your daughter has already provided the power of attorney documentation. Power of attorney. I echoed, genuine confusion in my voice. Audrey pulled out a document from her purse. You signed this, Mom. After your surgery last spring, remember? A distant memory surfaced. 6 months ago, I'd had a minor procedure to remove a benign cyst. Audrey had brought several documents to the hospital, claiming they were insurance forms that needed immediate attention. Still groggy from anesthesia, I had signed where she pointed. I never agreed to this, I said firmly. Whatever I signed, I was misled about its contents. Director Hendricks looked uncomfortable. Perhaps you'd like to see your room. Sometimes the transition is easier once you're settled. Without waiting for my response, she led us down a long corridor. The walls were lined with generic watercolor paintings and bulletin boards announcing bingo nights and craft sessions. Elderly residents sat in common areas, some staring vacantly at muted televisions, others dozing in wheelchairs. We stopped at room 117. A small laminated card already bore my name, Crystal Wilson. Inside was a narrow bed, a metal nightstand, a small dresser, and a single window overlooking the parking lot. The walls were bare, the linoleum floor scuffed from previous occupants. This is where you expect me to live? I asked, unable to hide my horror. It's a standard single room, Director Hendricks explained. Once you're settled, you can personalize it with photos and small mementos. She can bring a few things from the house before we sell it, Thomas added casually. Sell my house. The room seemed to spin around me. You're selling my home. Audrey pulled Director Hendricks aside, speaking in a stage whisper clearly meant for me to hear. She's been increasingly forgetful. The doctor mentioned early signs of dementia, though she refuses to accept the diagnosis. Another lie. My doctor had given me a clean bill of health just last month, complimenting me on my sharp mind and good physical condition for my age. When the director stepped out to give us family time, I confronted my daughter. Audrey, there is absolutely nothing wrong with my mental faculties. You know that. Mom, this is exactly what people with cognitive decline say, Audrey replied with exaggerated patience. You don't realize when you're repeating yourself or getting confused. It's been happening more and more. What are you talking about? Give me one example. She exchanged glances with Thomas. Last week you called 3 times in one day asking about Jackson's science fair project. Each time you acted like it was the first time you'd asked. This was a complete fabrication. I hadn't called at all last week. And you left the stove on when we visited last month, Thomas added. If I hadn't noticed, who knows what might have happened. Another lie. I always double-checked my appliances, a habit from living alone. They continued listing incidents that had never occurred, building a fictional case for my supposed mental decline. I realized with growing horror that they had constructed an elaborate narrative likely shared with friends and family, painting me as increasingly senile. Thomas stepped into the hallway to take a phone call, and I heard him mention the house and market value before moving out of earshot. When he returned, I confronted him directly. This is about money, isn't it? You're in debt again. His face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. We're trying to help you, Mom, Audrey insisted. And yes, we have some financial challenges, but that's not why we're here. Then why the rush to sell my house? Why today on my birthday with no warning? Thomas's control slipped. Do you have any idea what we're dealing with? The credit card debt, Jackson's school, the mortgage, your house sitting there way too big for one person while we're drowning. Thomas, Audrey hissed, but he was on a roll. Your house will solve our problems and you'll be safe here. It's a win-win. I looked at my daughter, searching for any sign of the little girl I'd raised, the one who once made me macaroni necklaces and giggled when I tucked her in at night. Instead, I saw a stranger who viewed me as nothing more than a financial solution. I want to speak to Jackson, I said finally. He's waiting in the car, Audrey replied. This is too upsetting for him. Of course it's upsetting. You're abandoning his grandmother in a nursing home under false pretenses. That's enough, Mom, Audrey snapped. This is happening. The sooner you accept it, the better for everyone. We'll bring some of your clothes tomorrow. They left me there standing in that sterile room with its unfamiliar smells and institutional furniture. No birthday dinner, no celebration, just betrayal and abandonment. That first night was the longest of my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my birthday dress, unable to bring myself to unpack the few belongings they'd brought. The dinner they served was bland and lukewarm. The night staff checked on me, hourly shining lights into my room, as if I might try to escape. Around midnight, my cell phone lit up with a text. It was from Jackson, sent secretly after his parents had gone to bed. "Grandma, I'm going to help you. I promise, what they did isn't right." In that moment of complete betrayal, my 12-year-old grandson was the only one standing by me. I clutched the phone to my chest and finally allowed myself to cry. The first week at Golden Sunset passed in a haze of disbelief and isolation. Audrey visited once briefly, bringing a small box of photos and clothing. She avoided my questions about the house and deflected my insistence that I was mentally sound. Thomas didn't come at all. The only brightness came from Jackson, who called whenever he could sneak away from his parents' supervision. "They're already packing up the house, Grandma," he told me during one hushed call. "Dad brought a real estate agent through yesterday. They're listing it next week." Each new revelation was a fresh wound. The home where I'd raised my daughter, where I'd built a life after losing my husband, was being dismantled without my consent. "Margaret tried to visit you," Jackson continued, referring to my neighbor of 20 years. "Mom told her you weren't allowed visitors yet, that you were adjusting to your medication." Another lie. I wasn't on any new medication. They were systematically cutting me off from anyone who might help me. On my 8th day at Golden Sunset, Dr. Reeves, the facility's visiting physician, came for my intake assessment. A kind-faced man in his 50s, he reviewed the paperwork Audrey had provided, then looked at me with curiosity. "Mrs. Wilson, your daughter reports significant cognitive decline, but I'm not seeing documentation of a formal diagnosis. Has a neurologist evaluated you recently?" "No," I said firmly, "because there's nothing wrong with my mind. My daughter fabricated these concerns to gain control of my assets." Instead of dismissing me, Dr. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. "Let's do a full cognitive assessment, shall we?" For the next hour, he put me through a series of tests: memory recall, problem solving, spatial reasoning, language skills. At the end, he sat back with a troubled expression. "Mrs. Wilson, you scored perfectly on every metric. There's absolutely no indication of cognitive impairment. In fact, your mental acuity is remarkable for any age." "Will you put that in writing?" I asked. He hesitated. "I need to be careful here. There are legal implications." "My daughter is selling my house without my permission based on a fraudulent claim of mental incompetence," I said plainly. "I need allies, doctor." Dr. Reeves studied me for a long moment. "I'll document my findings accurately in your medical record, and I can refer you to an independent neurologist for a second opinion, if that would help." "It would, thank you." After he left, I felt the first stirrings of hope. But I needed more than medical validation. I needed legal help. That evening, Jackson smuggled in something that would change everything: a prepaid cell phone. "I bought it with my allowance," he explained proudly during his visit. "Mom and Dad think you only have your regular phone, which they check. Use this one to call anyone you need to." I hugged him tightly, marveling at his resourcefulness. "You're an extraordinary young man, Jackson. Thank you." That night after lights out, I called Harold Greenblatt, my attorney for over 30 years. When I explained the situation, his outrage was palpable. "They can't do this, Crystal. The power of attorney is invalid if obtained through deception. And without a court finding of incompetence, they have no right to make these decisions for you." "They're already selling my house, Harold. I'll file an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow. But I need to establish your competence legally. Can I video call you now? I want to document our conversation." For the next hour, Harold recorded our interaction, asking detailed questions about my finances, my history, current events, and complex reasoning problems. By the end, he was satisfied. "No judge in their right mind would declare you incompetent. Now tell me exactly what you want to do." I thought carefully. I want to let them think they're succeeding for now. I need to understand the full extent of what they're planning. "A strategic retreat." "Exactly. Meanwhile, I need you to secure my actual assets." Harold knew about my substantial wealth, which I'd kept in separate accounts and investments that Audrey knew nothing about. My house, while valuable, was a fraction of my true net worth. Consider it done. I'll transfer everything to the secure trust we established. Audrey has no access or knowledge of those accounts, correct? Correct. She believes my teacher's pension is my only significant asset. The next revelation came from an unexpected source. Lucia, a nursing aide who'd been kind to me since my arrival, overheard my conversation with Dr. Reeves. During her evening rounds, she slipped into my room and closed the door. "Mrs. Wilson, I shouldn't be telling you this, but your daughter called the director today. She was asking about selling your jewelry to cover the costs here. She said you'd agreed to it, but wanted to check if you'd gotten confused and changed your mind. My grandmother's pearls, my wedding ring, the sapphire earrings from David, they plan to take everything. Thank you for telling me, Lucia. Would you be willing to help me document what's happening here?" She nodded without hesitation. "My own grandmother was taken advantage of by my uncle. I won't let it happen to someone else." With Lucia's help, I began keeping detailed records. She brought me a notebook where I documented every interaction, every statement made about me, every visitor denied. She also introduced me to other staff members who'd noticed the discrepancy between my apparent mental clarity and my daughter's claims. Through Jackson, I learned the most devastating news yet. Thomas had gambling debts, serious ones. He'd been hiding them from Audrey, taking out second and third mortgages on their home. My house wasn't just a convenient solution, it was their only way out of financial ruin. "I heard them fighting about it," Jackson told me. "Dad said they'd be bankrupt without selling your house. Mom said they should have put you in a state facility instead of somewhere so expensive." The final straw came when I overheard two staff members outside my door. "That's the crazy old woman in 117," one said to the other. "Daughter says she was some big shot on Wall Street, but now she can't remember what day at Island Sad." "Daughter must be relieved to have her somewhere safe," the other replied. They were talking about me as if I were already gone, erased and replaced by the fictional senile woman Audrey had invented. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt and betrayal crystallized into clear, cold resolve. I had been a top Wall Street executive, making billion-dollar decisions and outmaneuvering some of the sharpest minds in finance. I hadn't lost those skills. I'd just been too blindsided by betrayal to deploy them. No more. It was time to fight back. The next morning I called Harold from my secret phone. "I'm ready to move forward. How soon can you meet me?" "I can be there this afternoon. The staff won't let me in." "Not through the front door. But there's a garden area where residents can receive visitors. I'll tell them my attorney is coming to help me update my will." Harold arrived at 2 carrying his leather briefcase and the confident air of a man who'd been winning courtroom battles for 40 years. We sat at a stone table in the garden, far from prying ears. "I've secured your assets," he confirmed. "Every account, investment, portfolio, and property other than your primary residence is now locked down tight in the irrevocable trust. Audrey can't touch them, even if she somehow maintains power of attorney." "Good. Now what about the fraudulent POA?" Harold pulled out a file. "I've prepared a legal challenge. The court date is set for next Monday, just 5 days from now. Judge Hernandez is presiding, and she takes a very dim view of elder abuse." Elder abuse. The term hung in the air. Is that what this is? By legal definition, yes. Financial exploitation, isolation from support networks, false imprisonment, emotional abuse. It checks all the boxes, Cristal. I took a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" "Dr. Reeves has already provided his assessment. I've arranged for a court-appointed neurologist to evaluate you here tomorrow. Between those two professional opinions and our documentation of the circumstances under which the POA was obtained, we have a strong case." "And my house?" "I filed an injunction preventing the sale, but kept it sealed until the hearing. Audrey and Thomas won't know until they show up in court." We spent the next 2 hours refining our strategy. Harold would subpoena the nursing home records showing Audrey's instructions to limit my visitors. We would present financial records demonstrating Thomas and Audrey's mounting debt as motive. And most importantly, I would testify to my own competence. But there was one more piece to put in place. "Harold, I want to reveal my actual net worth during the hearing." He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? That's been private information for decades. I'm sure. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost through their betrayal. After Harold left, I found Lucia during her shift. I need your help preparing for a court appearance. Without hesitation, she agreed. For the next several days, she helped me document everything. She took photos of my living conditions, statements from other staff about instructions they'd received regarding me, and even recorded a conversation where the director admitted she'd never personally evaluated my mental state before admission. My grandmother had no one to fight for her, Lucia told me. I wish she'd had someone like you in her corner. After this is over, I promised I'm going to make sure other vulnerable seniors have advocates. I also stayed in close contact with Jackson, preparing him gently for what was coming. At 12, he was old enough to understand the basics of what his parents had done, but I worried about the emotional impact. Will you have to go to court, Grandma? He asked during one call. Yes, sweetheart. And the judge might ask you some questions too, but only if you're comfortable with that. I'll tell them everything he said with fierce loyalty. I've been keeping a journal of everything Mom and Dad say about you and the house. My heart swelled with pride and sadness. A child shouldn't have to document his parents' misdeeds, but Jackson's moral compass was true. The evening before the hearing, I sat alone in my room, reflecting on maternal love. I had given Audrey everything, sacrificed my time and energy to provide her with opportunities. Where had I gone wrong? Had my focus on financial security somehow taught her that money mattered more than people, or was this Thomas's influence alone? Regardless of how we'd reach this point, tomorrow would change everything. There would be no going back to the relationship we'd had. But perhaps in time there could be something new, built on honesty and boundaries, rather than exploitation and lies. I laid out the blue dress I'd worn on my birthday now, a symbol of both betrayal and resilience. Tomorrow I would wear it again as I reclaimed my life. Monday morning arrived with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Lucia helped me style my hair and apply subtle makeup. You look powerful, Mrs. Wilson, she said, adjusting the collar of my blue dress. Thank you, Lucia, for everything. Harold arranged for a private car to take us to the courthouse. As we pulled away from Golden Sunset, I felt a weight lifting. Whatever happened today, I wouldn't be returning to that small, depressing room. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with polished wooden benches and the seal of the state mounted behind the judge's bench. Harold and I sat at one table while the other remained empty. At 9 sharp, Judge Elena Hernandez entered, a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked black hair and penetrating dark eyes. All rise, called the bailiff, and the proceedings began. 10 minutes later, Audrey and Thomas hurried in looking confused and flustered. They hadn't expected a legal challenge. Thomas wore an ill-fitting suit that had seen better days, while Audrey had dressed carefully in a conservative blue outfit that echoed my own, a subtle attempt to present us as a united front. Their confusion turned to shock when they spotted Harold. Mom Audrey called across the room, "What's going on?" Judge Hernandez gavelled for order. Mrs. Wilson has petitioned this court to invalidate a power of attorney granted to Audrey Bennett on the grounds that it was obtained through deception and fraud. We'll hear evidence from both parties. Mr. Greenblatt, you may proceed. Harold was masterful. He presented Dr. Reeves's evaluation and the independent neurologist's report, both confirming my complete mental competence. He showed the nursing home admission papers signed the same day as my birthday, contrasted with text messages from Audrey to me that morning, mentioning a birthday dinner with no hint of institutionalization. Audrey and Thomas, who hadn't brought an attorney, looked increasingly distressed. When Harold presented financial records showing their mortgage was underwater and Thomas had taken out high-interest loans from questionable sources, Thomas leapt to his feet. Those records are private. This is harassment. They're relevant to establishing motive, Your Honor, Harold replied calmly. The Bennetts are in severe financial distress and stood to gain substantially from selling Mrs. Wilson's home. Objection overruled, Judge Hernandez said firmly. Please continue. Next came Lucia's documentation and testimony from 2 other nursing home staff members who confirmed they'd been instructed to treat me as cognitively impaired despite seeing no evidence of confusion. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand with my head high, made my oath, and faced the courtroom. Mrs. Wilson, Harold began, Please tell the court in your own words what happened on your 68th birthday." For the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything. The surprise trip to Golden Sunset, the suitcase already packed, the fabricated stories of cognitive decline, the isolation from friends and neighbors. I spoke clearly and factually without emotional embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. Throughout my testimony, I watched Audrey's face. She alternated between defiance and shame, occasionally whispering urgently to Thomas, who looked increasingly pale. When Harold asked about the circumstances under which I'd signed the power of attorney, Judge Hernandez leaned forward with particular interest. "I was recovering from anesthesia after a minor surgical procedure," I explained. Audrey brought several documents she claimed were insurance forms requiring immediate signature. I trusted my daughter and signed where she indicated without reading them carefully. "Would you have knowingly signed a power of attorney at that time?" "Absolutely not. I had no need for anyone to manage my affairs." When cross-examination came, Audrey approached the stand visibly nervous. "Mom, you know your memory has been slipping. Remember when you left the stove on? When you called 3 times about Jackson's science project? Those incidents never happened, Audrey. They were fabricated to support your narrative of my decline." "That's not true," she insisted, her voice rising. "Dad had early onset dementia before he died. The doctor said it could be hereditary." Another lie. David had died of a heart attack with no cognitive issues whatsoever. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "my medical records are in evidence. There is no family history of dementia, and no physician has ever diagnosed me with cognitive impairment." Judge Hernandez studied Audrey carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have any medical documentation of your mother's alleged cognitive decline?" "She refused to see specialists," Audrey claimed. "We were trying to help her. By selling her house without her knowledge, by isolating her from friends and support systems," the judge's tone was scathing. Thomas suddenly stood. "Your Honor, we had no choice. We're drowning in debt. The banks are threatening foreclosure. We needed the money from her house." "Thomas, shut up," Audrey hissed, but it was too late. "At least someone is being honest," Judge Hernandez noted dryly. "Mr. Bennett, are you admitting that financial gain was your motive for institutionalizing your mother-in-law?" Thomas looked trapped. "She doesn't need that big house. We have a family to support. It just made sense." Judge Hernandez had heard enough. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the power of attorney granted to Audrey Bennett is invalid, having been obtained through deception. Mrs. Wilson is hereby declared legally competent to manage her own affairs. The injunction against selling her property is made permanent. Mrs. Wilson is free to leave Golden Sunset immediately." Relief washed over me. It was over. I had won. But I wasn't finished yet. "Your Honor," I said, "may I make one further statement for the record?" The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Mrs. Wilson." I turned to face Audrey and Thomas directly. "Throughout this ordeal, you have operated under a significant misapprehension. You believed my house was my primary asset and that my teacher's pension was my only income." I nodded to Harold, who handed me a folder. From it, I extracted bank statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds. For the record, I wish to state that my actual net worth is approximately $300 million. The courtroom fell silent. Audrey's face went ashen. Thomas's jaw literally dropped. "That's not possible," Audrey whispered. 40 years in investment banking, living well below my means, and making shrewd investment choices, I explained. "The house you were so eager to sell represents less than 1% of my assets." I laid out the statements on the table before them. Properties in 3 states, investment portfolios, offshore accounts, stock in major tech companies purchased in their infancy. Had you simply asked for help, instead of resorting to deception and exploitation, I would have gladly assisted you. Instead, you betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. Thomas stared at the documents, his expression shifting from shock to bitter regret. $300 million, he repeated hoarsely. "None of which you will ever control," I stated firmly. "I've already revised my estate plan. Jackson will be well provided for through a trust you cannot access. As for the 2 of you, you've made your choice." Audrey finally found her voice. "Mom, we didn't understand. We were desperate. Please, you have to forgive us. We're family." Family doesn't imprison family members and steal their property, Judge Hernandez interjected. Mrs. Wilson, do you wish to press criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud? I considered this carefully. Not at this time, Your Honor, but I reserve the right to do so if there are any further attempts at exploitation. As the hearing concluded, Jackson burst through the courtroom doors, having convinced a family friend to bring him. He ran straight to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Grandma, you're free. Yes, sweetheart, I am. I hugged him tightly, then held him at arm's length. How would you feel about coming to live with me at least part-time? His eyes widened. Could I really? Your Honor, Harold said smoothly. Given the circumstances, my client will be filing for partial custody of her grandson immediately. Audrey stepped forward, panic in her eyes. You can't take our son. Not taking sharing, I corrected. Unless you'd prefer I press those criminal charges after all. Judge Hernandez actually smiled slightly. I suggest you work out a family arrangement, Mrs. Bennett. You're not in a strong position to object. As we left the courtroom, I outlined my plans to Harold. I'm buying a building in the city, a penthouse for me and an apartment below for Jackson to use when he stays with me. I'll need security and staff I can trust. Consider it done, Harold said. And may I say, Crystal, that was the most satisfying court appearance of my career. Thomas stopped us in the hallway, his expression desperate. Mrs. Wilson, please. We made a terrible mistake, but you saw our financial situation. We'll lose everything. I regarded him coolly. You should have thought of that before you declared me incompetent and abandoned me in a nursing home on my birthday. Audrey tried one last approach. Mom, please. We're still family. We can work this out. Yes, we are still family, I agreed. Which is the only reason I'm not pressing charges. But trust once broken must be earned back. That will take time if it happens at all. As Harold Jackson and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The betrayal had been devastating, but in its aftermath I found a new strength and purpose. Where to now? Grandma Jackson asked, his hand in mine. Home for now, I replied. And then a new beginning. 3 months after the courthouse revelation, I settled into my new penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building, a pre-war masterpiece I'd purchased outright, had been renovated to my specifications. My apartment occupied the top 2 floors with 11-foot ceilings, wall-to-wall windows, and a rooftop garden where Jackson and I often stargazed. The apartment directly below mine was reserved for Jackson during his visits, which a family court had mandated as every weekend and 3 days a week during school holidays. It was his space, decorated with astronomical charts, a professional telescope, and the books and games he loved. I hired staff carefully, a housekeeper, a cook, a driver, and a personal assistant. Each was thoroughly vetted by Harold's firm and signed strict confidentiality agreements. Most importantly, I hired Lucia away from Golden Sunset at triple her previous salary to serve as my health coordinator and companion. I never thought I'd leave nursing, she told me as we had tea on the terrace. But this feels right. I'm still caring for someone, just in a different way. You're not just an employee, Lucia. You're the friend who stood by me when I most needed support. Rebuilding my relationship with Jackson was my highest priority. The custody arrangement gave us substantial time together, but more importantly, it provided him stability during a chaotic time in his family life. Dad moved out, he told me during his first weekend stay. He and Mom fight all the time about money and about you. I pulled him close. I'm so sorry you're caught in the middle of adult problems, sweetheart. It's not your fault, Grandma. They did something terrible to you. Yes, they did. But that doesn't mean they don't love you very much. I was careful never to disparage Audrey or Thomas in front of Jackson, despite my own feelings. Children shouldn't be forced to choose sides, and despite everything, they were still his parents. With Jackson's well-being in mind, I established a trust for his education and future that neither Audrey nor Thomas could access. It would cover his schooling through graduate studies and provide a substantial nest egg for adulthood, but was structured to encourage work ethic and responsibility rather than entitlement. Healing from betrayal is never a linear process. Some days the pain felt as fresh as that birthday at Golden Sunset. Other days I could look at old family photos and remember the good times without bitterness. I worked with a therapist specializing in family trauma, learning to process my grief for the relationship I thought I had. "You're mourning a loss," Dr. Sampson explained during one session, "not just of trust, but of the future you imagined with your daughter." "Will I ever be able to trust her again?" I asked. "That depends on many factors, including her willingness to take genuine responsibility. But regardless, you can heal and thrive with or without reconciliation." Finding purpose beyond the betrayal became essential to my healing. I established the Wilson Elder Justice Foundation, dedicated to preventing financial exploitation of seniors and providing legal advocacy for those without resources to fight back. "If I can help even one person avoid what happened to me," I told Harold when we filed the foundation paperwork, "then something good will have come from this experience." The foundation quickly gained attention, and I found myself speaking at conferences and to policymakers about strengthening protections for vulnerable elders. My Wall Street connections proved invaluable in securing funding and political support. Lucia became the foundation's first program director, using her healthcare background to train nursing home staff to recognize signs of exploitation and coercion. "This is my calling," she told me proudly after her first training session. "Your story is changing lives." 6 months after the court hearing, Audrey reached out asking to meet. We sat in a neutral location, a quiet tea room downtown, both tense and uncertain. "I've been in therapy," she began, trying to understand why I did what I did. "It wasn't just about money, though, that was part of it." "What was it about then?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I think I resented you, your competence, your independence. I told myself you needed me, that I was helping you, but really, I wanted to control you." She looked down at her untouched tea. "It's not an excuse, just an explanation I'm working through." It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. "Thomas and I are divorcing," she continued. "His gambling was worse than I knew. He remortgaged the cabin without telling me." I felt a flicker of sympathy despite myself. "I'm sorry you're going through that. Jackson tells me about your foundation, the work you're doing." She hesitated. "I'd like to help if you'd let me, maybe volunteer, try to make amends somehow." I considered her offer carefully. "Let's start smaller, weekly lunches, rebuilding basic trust. The foundation can come later if things progress." She nodded, accepting my boundaries. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was an open door where there had been a wall. Thomas's path took a different turn. The divorce proceedings revealed gambling debts far beyond what even Audrey had known. He left the state avoiding creditors and responsibilities alike. Jackson was hurt by his father's abandonment, but found stability in our new routine and in therapy sessions that helped him process the family upheaval. One evening, as Jackson and I observed a meteor shower from the rooftop garden, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, are you happy now? Even after everything that happened?" I considered his question thoughtfully. "Happiness isn't constant, Jackson. Some days are easier than others. But yes, I've found contentment and purpose again, and having you in my life brings me great joy. I'm going to take care of you when you really are old," he declared solemnly. "But not because I have to, because I want to." "That's the only reason anyone should care for another person," I told him. "Out of love, not obligation." That perhaps was the deepest lesson from my ordeal. True worth isn't measured in dollar amounts or property deeds. It's found in relationships built on respect and genuine care. My daughter had seen me as a financial solution, not as a person with dignity and autonomy. In doing so, she had sacrificed something far more valuable than money, trust, and connection. As I approach my 70th birthday, I look back on the past 2 years with mixed emotions. The betrayal changed me in fundamental ways. I'm more cautious, more protective of my independence. But I'm also more purposeful, more aware of how I can use my resources and experience to help others. My relationship with Audrey remains complicated. We've established a careful truce built on clear boundaries and ongoing therapy. True reconciliation may or may not come with time. I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I know for certain is this: our worth as human beings never diminishes with age. We don't become less deserving of dignity and respect as our hair silvers and our steps slow. If my story teaches anything, it's that we must vigilantly protect the vulnerable among us, especially those whose voices might be dismissed as crazy or confused. So, I ask you, who are the elders in your life? How do you show them they're valued, not for what they own, but for who they are? Have you experienced betrayal from those you trusted most, and how did you rebuild your life afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening to this chapter of my journey, and remember that your worth is inherent, unchangeable, and never dependent on anyone else's validation.